Stop right there. The young woman's voice cut through the chaos as she stepped between danger and the two terrified boys. No one in that crowded street knew that the children she had just protected belonged to the most feared man in the city, and within minutes, his powerful mother would look at her with calm certainty and declare that this brave girl was not a stranger anymore. She was family. The street outside the busy Seoul market had been loud and restless that afternoon, full of color, laughter, and the smell of hot street food drifting through the warm air. Vendors called out to customers, while scooters hummed through narrow lanes. Yet in the middle of that ordinary moment, panic suddenly exploded like a storm. Two small boys, identical in face and fear, ran blindly through the crowd, while a group of men pushed after them with sharp urgency. People stepped aside, pretending not to notice. Eyes dropped to the ground. Fear had a way of silencing everyone, but one person refused to move away. A young black woman stood firm near the fruit stall, her shoulders straight, her eyes steady. She saw the terror on the boys' faces before anyone else truly looked. When one of them tripped and fell hard onto the pavement, she moved without thinking. Her arm reached down, lifting the boy gently while pulling the other behind her. Her body became a wall between the children and the men closing in. The crowd froze. The men slowed, surprised that someone had dared to interrupt them. The girl's voice remained calm but unshakable as she told them the children would not be touched. The air tightened with tension, thick as a thundercloud waiting to burst. No one knew that these two boys were the twin sons of a man whose name alone made powerful people lower their voices. And no one knew that the quiet courage of a stranger had just changed the course of many lives. Her name was Amara Johnson, and courage had never been something she practiced only when it was safe. It was woven into her life long before she ever stepped onto the streets of Seoul. She had grown up in a small coastal town where the ocean winds carried the scent of salt and freedom. Her father had been a quiet man who worked long hours repairing fishing boats, and her mother had been a nurse who believed that kindness was the strongest force a person could carry. When Amara was young, she watched her mother treat strangers with the same care she gave family. She learned that helping someone in danger was not a question but a duty. Years later, when her parents passed away within months of each other, the world suddenly felt colder. Grief pushed her forward rather than breaking her. She studied hard, trained as a paramedic, and traveled abroad with relief groups that responded to emergencies around the world. She had walked through disaster zones where smoke filled the air and people cried for help in languages she did not know. She had held the hands of strangers who were afraid and reminded them that someone still cared. Each experience left quiet marks on her heart. She carried memories of faces she saved and faces she could not. That day in Seoul, she had simply been finishing a volunteer shift at a clinic nearby. She wore simple clothes and carried a small bag of supplies. To the crowd she looked like any other passerby, but inside her lived years of training, sacrifice, and the stubborn belief that fear should never decide who deserves protection. The men approaching the twins were not used to resistance. Their movements slowed as they studied the young woman standing before them. The market grew strangely quiet. Vendors stopped counting money. Customers stopped speaking. Even the wind seemed to hesitate between the narrow buildings. Everyone sensed the tension pressing down on the scene. The boys clung to Amara's arms, their small hands shaking against her sleeves. She knelt slightly, so her body shielded them more fully, her calm eyes never leaving the men. She did not shout or threaten. She simply refused to move. One of the men stepped forward, his expression tight with irritation. He explained coldly that the children needed to come with them. Amara listened without flinching. Something about the situation felt wrong. The boys were not crying for these men. They were shrinking away. Her instincts, sharpened by years of emergency work, told her that fear rarely lies. Around them the crowd remained silent, unwilling to challenge anyone who looked dangerous. Silence can sometimes be the loudest form of fear. Yet Amara stood steady like a tree refusing to bend in a storm. In that quiet moment she spoke words that carried simple strength. Children deserve safety before power, before money, before fear. The sentence drifted through the air like a stone dropped into still water. For a brief second the men hesitated. They were not used to hearing truth spoken so calmly. What Amara did not know was that the twins, Min and June, were not ordinary children. They were the only sons of Kong Dae-hayon, a man whose influence stretched through hidden corridors of the city. Some called him a businessman, others whispered darker titles, but everyone agreed on one thing. Kong protected his family with absolute devotion. Earlier that day, the twins had slipped away from their bodyguards while exploring the lively market. In a city where power attracts enemies, that small moment of freedom had created danger. The men chasing them were not kidnappers, but members of a rival group hoping to send a message. And somewhere across the city, Kong had already received the call that his sons were missing. Black vehicles were racing through traffic. Powerful allies were mobilizing. But fate had moved faster than any of them. Fate had placed Amara Johnson at the exact point where two frightened boys needed protection. As the standoff grew tense, a quiet signal passed among the men approaching her. They began to circle slowly, testing her resolve. Yet the young woman did not step back. Her heartbeat remained steady, her posture calm. Inside her mind, a simple truth guided every choice she made. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision that someone else's safety matters more than your own. Then the power shift arrived, like the sudden turning of a tide. Black vehicles rolled into the street, one after another, stopping with controlled precision. The crowd parted instantly. Men in dark suits stepped out, their presence calm but commanding. At their center walked an elderly woman with silver hair and a posture that carried quiet authority. She moved slowly toward the scene, her sharp eyes observing everything. This was Madame Kong, the mother of Kong De-hyun and the grandmother of the twins. The men surrounding Amara immediately stepped back, their confidence melting under the woman's silent gaze. The twins recognized her first. Their fear broke into relief as they ran toward her. Madame Kong held them briefly, her hand resting on their heads, as if reassuring them that the world had returned to order. Only then did she look at Amara. The market remained silent as the two women faced each other. Madame Kong studied the young stranger who had stood alone against danger for children she did not know. There was no fear in Amara's posture, only quiet concern for the boy's safety. In that moment, the elderly woman spoke words that no one expected. A woman who protects my grandchildren with her own body already carries the heart of this family. Respect cannot be bought. It is proven when no one is watching. The statement spread through the crowd like warm sunlight after a long storm. Kong De-hyun himself soon arrived, stepping out of the final vehicle with a face hardened by worry. When he saw his sons safe beside his mother, relief softened the lines of power on his face. His eyes turned to Amara with deep curiosity. Madame Kong explained calmly what had happened, her voice carrying quiet pride in the brave stranger who had protected the twins. The powerful man bowed his head slightly toward Amara, a gesture few people in the city had ever received from him. He spoke slowly, his tone filled with sincere respect. A person's true strength shows when they stand for those who cannot stand alone. The market crowd watched in disbelief as one of the most feared men in Seoul honored a young volunteer who had expected nothing in return. But the most surprising moment came when Madame Kong placed her gentle hand over Amara's. She said that courage like hers deserved more than thanks. It deserved a place in their family. The words were not spoken as a command, but as a heartfelt invitation. The crowd felt something rare unfolding before their eyes. Power had recognized humility, wealth had bowed to kindness, and courage had built a bridge between two worlds that had never expected to meet. As the vehicles prepared to leave, people around the market slowly began to clap. It started with a single vendor who had watched the entire scene from behind his fruit stand. Then another person joined. Soon the applause rolled through the street in waves of quiet admiration. Amara felt the warmth of that moment settle gently in her heart. She had not acted for recognition. She had simply followed the values that shaped her life. Yet sometimes the world pauses long enough to honor the people who refuse to look away from injustice. Madame Kong looked back at the crowd and spoke a final reflection that stayed in many hearts long after the vehicles disappeared down the street. True honor is silent until the moment it is needed most. The market slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm, but everyone present knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. A stranger had protected two children with nothing but courage and compassion, and that simple act had transformed suspicion into respect, strangers into family,